and add this to that.
Okay.
I'm going to first talk about what's framed here, where the town of Brunson started, and then when I get to Oak Grove, it's that one that's not framed.
Okay.
And this comes from a Federal Writers Project of first-hand accounts of the war from the families, and this was written in 1938. Mrs. C.G. Richardson was born near what is now Brunson, Hampton County, but then the old Beaufort district 81 years ago. Her father, Mr. W.E. Brunson, owned a large plantation, and that's the ones, the framed ones. And the present town of Brunson later grew up in what was his cornfield. Mrs. Richardson, then Hattie Brunson, was very small at the time the Civil War began, but she remembers the day her three brothers rode off to join the Confederate Army. She knew they were going to war, but that meant nothing to her, and she was excited and happy because when any of her brothers went away on horseback, he always took her in front of him on the saddle as far as the gate. She thought she was going to get the usual ride this time and was very much hurt and disappointed when none of them even noticed her except to kiss her goodbye. She was puzzled too because her mother was crying and the entire family looked serious and sad. She remembers as though it were yesterday standing with the rest of the family on the porch from that house and watching her brothers gallop off down the road, turn and disappear from sight. In a short while she heard the sound of the horses returning and was surprised to see her brothers coming up the drive. They brought their horses close to the porch, leaned across the banisters, kissed their mother again, and galloped away once more. This scene has been like a vivid picture in her memory all through the years. And from the time she watched her brothers ride away to war, Mrs. Richardson says her memory seems to be a blank until the news came that Sherman's army was on the way. She recalls the great excitement on the plantation then as slaves and members of the family scurried about picking valuables and food preparatory to leaving home for the upcountry. The Brunsons had planned to travel with their neighbors in a sort of caravan to escape the path of Sherman's march, and the 5 Brunson children were thrilled at the prospect of traveling. The day came on which they were to start, and she remembers the disappointment they all felt when her mother, sitting at the breakfast table, announced that she had decided not to leave, but remain and take her chances with the Yankees right in her own home. Their nearest neighbors, the Richardson family, and that's Oak Grove, the one that's not framed, whose plantation to join their own and whose son, Dr. C.G. Richardson, the little Hattie Brunson, later grew up to marry, decided to remain at home also. The change of plans necessitated a lot of work to hide food and valuables. Food and articles of value were secreted in the walls of the house and buried in the lot where they were covered with dirt and manure. Mr. Brunson, who was beyond the age limit, he was 53, and did not get into the army until toward the last, divided all the meat and provisions which he was unable to hide among his slaves, as he did not believe the Yankees would take food from them. At last they saw Sherman's army marching up the road. 5 men approached first and searched Mr. Brunson, but found nothing. He had taken the precaution of giving his oldest daughter, a girl of about 15, his much prized watch several days before, and Mrs. Richardson accompanied her sister into the woods where they hid it beneath the gnarled root of a large tree. The soldiers entered the house and plundered it from cellar to attic. They ripped open mattresses and pillows, scattering feathers and cotton everywhere, and took whatever they fancied. Mrs. Richardson tells how they took the children's rag dolls and tore them to pieces before their eyes. However, they saved their best-loved china dolls by hiding them on their persons. Having wrought havoc to their satisfaction in the house, the soldiers then proceeded to destroy what they could on the outside. The gin house full of cotton was just across the road from the house, and this they set on fire. They killed all the chickens, hogs, and cattle for their own uses, and what they could not use of the flour, rice, and grits, they emptied together on the ground. They carried off all the horses and mules and left the plantation bare of almost all the food. Fortunately, they did not burn the house, and also missed a lot of cotton which Mr. Brunson had stored in an empty house on the place. The oldest Brunson girl was very pretty, and several of the young Northern soldiers were smitten with her charms and tried to present her with gifts pilfered from her father's house. Mrs. Richardson relates an incident which was far from funny to her then, but which at this distance often causes her to smile. She was sitting on the front porch with her sister when one of the soldiers offered her 2 hams from her father's smokehouse. The older sister refused the hams, and the smaller child was astonished at such behavior, for, in her opinion, Hams were not to be spurned at that time when food was at a premium. The soldier put the hams on the edge of the porch and told her sister, well, I'll just leave them here for you in case you change your mind. She could scarcely keep from jumping up and grabbing the hams herself, but her sister rose contemptuously and kicked them to the ground, and that was Robert Marion and my great-great-grandmother, Mary Etta Rebecca Brunson. Terrible as the situation was, the Brunson family got at least one good laugh at the expense of the Yankees. Mr. Brunson kept bees, and one of the soldiers decided he would like to have some honey. It was obvious that he knew nothing of the habits of bees, for he marched boldly up to one of the hives and stopping, smashed it open. When he raised his head, it was literally black with bees. And with a wild yell, he tore off frantically down the road to the accompaniment of the delighted laughter of the Brunsons. And now for a little tiny bit on Oak Grove, the other one that was 1 mile from that house. Of all the stories of places spared, the best known in Hampton County perhaps is that of the impressive antebellum James Cameron Richardson home, Oak Grove, a couple of miles southwest of Brunson, near the junction of the old Orangeburg Road and Pocatalico Road, which was the stagecoach route from Augusta to Beaufort and Savannah. This house was commandeered by Sherman in early February 1865 on his Savannah to Columbia march. The stately colonial mansion was used by Sherman as his headquarters, while some 22,000 of his troops encamped on the Magnolia and oak-bordered grounds. Now, General Sherman, accompanied by several officers, went into the house and was met by Mr. Richardson, to whom he made himself known. When Mr. Richardson asked for protection from further damage and trespass, General Sherman directed one of the accompanying officers to have at once a guard placed at each entrance with strict orders to allow no trespassing or disorder. In reference to this, I have heard Mrs. Richardson, in the presence of Mr. Richardson, allege, I was present and believe that Mr. Richardson gave General Sherman a Masonic sign. The proud and austere old gentleman would not either plead guilty or not guilty to that allegation, but the house was spared. And one more thing, this was from the viewpoint of a slave, Adeline Gray, who was 82 years old back when this Federal Writers Project was being done. I was a girl when freedom was declared, and I can remember about the times. My ma used to belong to old man Dave Warner. I remember how she used to wash and iron and cook during slavery time. I remember when the Yankees came through. I was right at the old boss's place. It was on the riverside. Miss Jane Warner was the missus. The place is here now, where all the children were raised. And Mr. Rhodes got a turpentine still there now, just after you pass the house. They burned the gin house, the shop, the buggy house, the turkey house, and the fowl house, and starting to set the cornhouse afire. But my mom said, please, so don't burn the cornhouse. Give it to me and my children. So they put the fire out. And I remember when they started to break down the smokehouse door, and old Mrs. came and she said, please don't break down the door open. I have the key. So they quit. I remember when they shot the hogs, and I remember when they shot the 2 geese in the yard, and they choked my mom. They went to her and they said, where's all the silver? And my mom said, she don't know. You don't know. And choked her till she couldn't talk. They went into the company room where the old miss was staying, and they started tearing up the bed. And then the captain come in, and the old miss said to him, please don't let them tear up my bed. And the captain went in there and told him to come out. The old miss wasn't scared, but the young miss made sure she's sure scared. She was courting at the time, and she went and shut herself up in a room. And the old miss asked the captain, please go in and talk to the miss. She's so scared. So he went in, and soon he brought her out. Now, we children weren't scared, but my brother ran under the house, and the soldiers went under there, poking their bayonets into the ground to try to find where the silver was buried. And they ran across him. What you doing under here? They say, I'm just running the chickens out, sir. They said, well, you can go on out. They say, we are not going to hurt you. And I remember when they killed the hog and cooked it. And they cooked it in the fire where the little shop had been. And they cooked him and ate him. And why didn't they cook him on the stove? Didn't have any stoves. Just had to cook on the fireplace, and had to cook in the oven, had an oven to fit inside the fireplace. I remember when my mom saw the